Saluda County.
Listen,
Do you believe me now?
I believe you. There are so many people
I know
that love Shari, and they just won't give up.
Shari,
They just continue to look.
I want to tell you one other thing. Shari is now part of me. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, our souls are one now.
In 2017, Netflix released the show Mindhunter, a drama series based on the formation of the real-life behavioral science unit of the FBI, now called the Behavioral Analysis Unit. The purpose of this unit, as defined by the FBI themselves, is split into 4 parts. Criminal investigative analysis, analyzing an offender's motivation, victim selection, sophistication level, actions, and relationship to that particular crime, along with the sequence of events. Interview strategy, combining behavioral principles, psychological concepts, and science-based methods to prepare for, conduct, and analyze an interview. Investigative strategy, providing behaviorally based recommendations to amplify an investigation's effectiveness and prioritize resources. And finally, threat assessments, analyzing an individual's pattern of thinking and behavior to determine whether they're moving toward an attack on a target and to what extent. In essence, to state it simply, the Behavioral Science Unit employs different strategies to profile the potential perpetrators of various crimes, based off things that a typical investigation is likely to overlook or not put as much importance onto. The Behavioral Science Unit is responsible for many investigative breakthroughs, methodologies, and ways of breaking down a case in order to go from 0 suspects and 0 evidence to, at the very least, a profile of the type of person who could have committed the crime. In fact, the Behavioral Science Unit, specifically an agent by the name of Robert Ressler, first coined the term serial killer in 1974. Of course, nowadays, one of the most widely known FBI agents as part of this unit was John E. Douglas. As partially depicted on the Netflix series, part of Douglas's research into the criminal mind and motivations for particularly strange or violent crimes, he interviewed some of the most notorious violent criminals in history, including Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Charles Manson, Edmund Kemper, and James Earl Ray. And without recapping his entire professional career, it's safe to say that John E. Douglas has seen and experienced quite a bit of the most violent, extreme, and depraved behavior available, much of it firsthand. So what kind of case keeps someone like that up at night? Buckle up, because this one's gonna be a doozy. Late afternoon on May 31st, 1985, in Lexington, South Carolina, a man by the name of Robert Smith is working from his home office. From the window of his office, he can see his 17-year-old daughter Shari pulling into the end of their long driveway. At this moment, Robert briefly leaves his office to get something from another room. When he returns back to his office and glances out the window again, he notices something odd. Shari's car is still in the driveway, the door to the car is open, but Shari is nowhere to be found. Very quickly, Robert begins to get a little nervous, but not overly so. Mostly, he's concerned because Shari has a rare form of diabetes that can cause her to become dehydrated and even pass out, which is initially what he thinks could have happened. So Robert makes his way down the driveway to Shari's car, and there's no one there. He looks in Shari's car and sees her purse along with her diabetes medication. The whole scene is eerily quiet. And so, panic growing, Robert makes his way back to the house and immediately calls 911. Very soon after, the assistant sheriff of Lexington County arrives to investigate, and from the get-go, he feels as if something is definitely off with this disappearance. A search effort is organized between the Lexington County Police Department and the FBI to try and find Shari. The driveway is sealed off and a detailed search of the surrounding area is done in an attempt to find Shari, or at the very least, evidence of where she went. The search radius expands up to 25 miles around the Smiths' residence. All the while, the news of Shari's disappearance begins to spread and garner more and more attention, and an abduction seems more and more like it could be the cause of Shari's vanishing. Despite the best efforts of the search team, however, there appeared to be no trace of the 17-year-old girl.
Police say 17-year-old Shari Smith of Lexington, apparently kidnapped Friday afternoon, is a diabetic and in need of medication soon. The high school senior was first feared abducted after her car was found abandoned in the driveway of her family's home with the door open and the engine running shortly after 3 p.m. Lexington police say they have no doubt Smith was taken against her will. The teenager was barefoot and wearing a swimsuit at the time she vanished. Deputies found footprints leading away from the car to the mailbox about 70 yards from her home, but no return tracks. A red bandana belonging to Smith was found on Platte Springs Road, leading away from West Columbia. Police are using every method available, including constant surveillance with planes. Smith is well liked in her community, and hundreds of volunteers have been combing the thick woods around her home. William Lawson has known Smith since she was 11 and says it's just not like her.
To leave home at night or in the evening like that or in the afternoon, she would have never done a thing like this.
Lexington police are having trouble remaining optimistic. Smith has water diabetes, one of only 3 cases in the state. Unless she gets her medicine or plenty of water, she may go into a coma.
But I must be realistic, and things do not look good. We're just getting all kinds of information that we're having to run down right now, and unfortunately nothing has come out for us at this point in time.
Sheriff Metz says they're looking for a white male with brown hair and a thin brown mustache in his 20s. Witnesses say they may have seen Smith and her kidnapper at a rural pond, and witnesses report 2 unusual vehicles in the neighborhood at the time of her disappearance.
Three days after Shari's mysterious disappearance, Shari's family received an eerie and nightmarish phone call, the first of quite a few phone calls that they would receive over the course of the investigation. Early that morning, Shari's family received a call from a man. His voice was deep, sounding almost altered to keep his identity obscured. He claimed that Shari's family and all the searchers were looking for her in the wrong place, because he was the one who took Shari. He said that he did not want any money, and that Shari would be returned to her family in a few days. He also tells her family that to prove this wasn't a hoax, the family would receive a letter in the mail shortly that would prove to them that he had their daughter. After this, the mysterious caller hung up just as abruptly as he called. The authorities, not wanting to waste any time, go to the local post office to intercept the letter, and eventually they find it. Upon opening the envelope, the police and Shari's family find a 2-page letter that can only be described as incredibly unsettling and heartbreaking. Shari's father, Bob, was the first to read the letter. The letter was dated June 1st, 1985. A day after Shari had been taken. A timestamp of 3:10 a.m. is written on the top, along with a very eerie title, Last Will and Testament. In the letter, which presumably was written by Shari, she talks about how much she loves her family. On the side of the first page, she wrote the phrase, God is love, vertically on the margin of the page. Within the first page, she says things like, I'll be with my father now, so please, please don't worry. Just remember my witty personality and great special times we all shared together. She also says, some good will come out of this. On the second page, she says, I am sorry if I ever disappointed you in any way. I only wanted to make you proud of me, and I know y'all love me and will miss me very much. As part of the conclusion to the letter, she writes, I love y'all with all my heart. The letter was then sent out for forensic testing to find any clues, fibers, fingerprints, handprints, discrepancies in spelling or handwriting, anything that could lead authorities to whoever kidnapped Shari. Obviously, the phrasing, tone, and content of this letter didn't bode well for the idea that they might find their daughter alive. And as difficult as this letter must have been to receive and read, the Smith family would have to deal with much more upsetting behavior from their daughter's captor. And that caller would ring the Smith family once again, a day later.
This is Hilda.
Did you receive Shari Ray's letter?
Pardon? I can't hear you. It's not very clear. Speak louder.
Did you receive the letter today?
Yes, I did.
Tell me one thing it said.
Tell you one thing it said?
Anything. Hurry.
Sir Richard?
Do what?
There was a little heart on the side, Sir Richard, written on the side. It said...
How many pages?
2 pages.
Okay, it's yellow legal pad.
Yeah.
And on one side on the front page it said, Jesus is love.
No, God is love.
Well, God is love.
Right.
Okay, so you know now that this is not a hoax call.
Yes, I know that.
Okay. I'm trying to do everything possible to answer some of your prayers, so please, in the name of God, work with us here.
All right. Can you answer me one question, please? You are very kind, and you seem to be a compassionate person, and I think you know how I feel being Sherry's mother and how much I love her. Can you tell me, is she all right physically without her medicine?
Sherry is drinking a little over 2 gallons of water per hour and using the bathroom right afterwards.
All right. Is she able to eat? Because she doesn't usually eat. That's what concerns me.
Listen, I got to hurry now.
I know that.
Okay, now, what I'm going to do is have an ambulance. Now, this is very important. This has gone too far. Please forgive me. Have an ambulance ready at any time at your house.
Have an ambulance ready,
and
then?
On Sherry's request, she requests that only immediate family come and Sheriff Metz and the ambulance attendants. She don't want to make a circus out of this.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
And where she said, cast it closed in parentheses.
Right.
If anything happens to me, she said one of her requests she did not put in there, to put her hands on her stomach like she was praying in the casket.
What now?
Cross her hands.
Why would anything happen to you? We don't want any harm to you. I promise. We just want Sherry well and... All right, okay?
Okay, forget Lexington County. Look in Saluda County. Do you understand?
Look in Saluda County.
Exactly. The closest to Lexington County, within a 15-mile radius right over the line. Is that understood?
Yeah.
And please, and very, very soon, please, now Sherry's request, Sherry Faye, request, please, no strangers, hardly, and when we give the location.
No strangers, absolutely.
Okay. Now, did you understand about the folding of the hands, like she was in prayer in case something happens to us?
Yes, if something happens to y'all. But nothing, listen, nobody is going to harm you. I promise you that.
Sheriff Metz, that I don't know what the problem is. I told you to forget about looking around your house. Saluda County.
Listen,
Do you believe me now?
I believe you. There are so many people
I know
that love Sherry, and they just won't give up.
Sherry,
They just continue to look.
I want to tell you one other thing. Sherry is now part of me. Physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, our souls are one now.
Your souls are one now with Sherry?
Yes, and we're trying to work this out. So please do what we ask. You haven't been doing that. I don't understand. And she doesn't. We sit here and watch TV. We see no sheriff.
Why doesn't Sherry talk to me? She knows me so well.
That's why she asked me to communicate with you, not your husband. Aren't you aware of that?
Yes, I know that. I know that she would ask you to talk with me.
She does love y'all, and like she said, do not let this ruin your lives.
We're not going to let it ruin our...
Okay, well,
Listen, you tell Sherry one thing.
What is right?
There's no way my life could ever have any happiness in it again if Sherry left this world with me bearing a guilt that I had felt in such a bad way, because I love her and I want to make her happy. I'll do anything to work it out. She doesn't have to come home, okay? I'm serious. She does not have to come home. Anything.
Well, time's up, and please now, have the ambulance ready at any time. This will not go any further, and it will be soon.
The ambulance, you're not telling me that something's going to happen to her and I'm going to have an ambulance.
I'm telling you her condition
is getting bad. Is that what
you know more about it than I do?
I know I do, and that's why I am so worried about it.
Well, you have the ambulance, and I'll give you the location, and tell Sheriff Metz to get all his damn men in Saluda County. Okay, well, God bless all
Will
of
you
us.
call me soon?
I will.
You call me back tonight? I just need reassurance to know that she's still
I have
okay.
to be careful. I got to go now, and listen,
Will you?
please forgive me for this. It just got out of hand.
I know. Listen, do me one thing.
What is that? Hurry.
Just tell Sherry. I know she knows how much I love her. Tell her daddy loves her, and her daddy will work anything out with her under the sun, and he admits we've got a lot of problems, and we'll work them out, and her brother and sister love her. And
Okay.
God bless you for taking care of my baby.
Sherry is protected, and like you said, she is a part of me now. And God look after all of us.
Yeah.
Good night.
Good luck to you, too.
One of the most unsettling comments is that Sherry is part of him now. Bob, Sherry's father, would comment that, "For the first time in my life as the father and protector of my household, I was not in charge of my home." The mystery caller clearly enjoys the control he can garner from these phone calls, and it becomes more than apparent that at this time, more than likely Sherry is no longer alive. These repeated phone calls, 8 in total over the course of the investigation, is just a painful reminder that their daughter is no longer with them. He repeatedly demands that the investigation be called off if the family wants to see Sherry again. And with no major leads, other options need to be considered. John Douglas, who we mentioned earlier, and his behavioral science unit was called in to assist in creating a profile for the caller in an attempt to narrow down the search. His initial thoughts were that this was not the mystery caller's first crime. In fact, John Douglas outlines a typical progression for criminals of this nature. 1. The individual perhaps starts out as a peeping Tom, leering at women, following them, watching them from a distance, maybe even following them around public places or even to their homes. 2. From this, the individual could move on to something that involves them actually interacting with the victim, like making obscene phone calls or leaving letters. 3. Eventually, this could escalate to attempted assault, or even kidnapping or murder. The profile that the behavioral science unit came up with for this case was as follows. White male, late 20s or early 30s, homely or overweight, married but divorced or separated, organized, sadistic narcissistic personality, inflated sense of self or the feeling like he could never be caught, needs control over his crimes and those around the victims, above average intelligence with some experience or knowledge of electronics, possibly a contractor, not impulsive or one to take needless chances. In order to bait him into making another call for them to potentially trace or get some other information, the authorities set up a very public, televised interview with the family, hoping that the mystery caller would be watching. And just as expected, he makes yet another call. Within a day of this call being made, the Smith family gets yet another call from the mystery man.
Listen carefully. Take Highway 378 west to traffic circle. Take Prosperity exit. Go 1.5 miles. Turn right at sign. Moose Lodge number 103. Go 1/4 mile. Turn left at white frame building. Go to backyard. 6 feet beyond, we're waiting. God chose us.
This last call unfortunately leads authorities to a discovery that puts the question of whether or not Sherry is alive to rest. They discover her body from a helicopter, behind a tree line near where the caller said she would be. From an analysis of the body, it was determined that Sherry had been dead about 4 days and was killed within 12 hours of being abducted. It was also theorized that when the killer called and stated that he and Sherry had become one soul on June 1st at 4:58 a.m., that was the time the caller had killed Sherry. The Smith family receives another phone call from the killer that evening, where he reveals something very telling. He slips and lets it known that Dawn, Sherry's sister, may have been his original target. On this same phone call, he talks to Dawn about how things got out of control and how he had to kill Sherry. He also wallows in self-pity and claims he'll turn himself in, as well as give details on Sherry's death. And although authorities are able to trace the call, he's gone by the time they arrive. On June 14, 1985, a 9.5-year-old girl by the name of Debra Mae Helmick was playing outside of her family's trailer in the Shiloh Trailer Park in Richland County with her 3-year-old brother. A neighbor inside of a nearby trailer looked out his window and saw the 2 children playing outside. However, this neighbor would soon witness something horrifying. Within moments of the neighbor looking outside his window, he saw a silver car drive into the trailer park at high speed, going right past the Helmick's trailer and stopping right by where the children were playing. A man exited the vehicle and moved quickly towards Debra and her little brother. The man grabbed Debra by the waist and began dragging her back to his vehicle, with Debra kicking and screaming. At this point, the neighbor sprung into action and ran outside, attempting to stop the man from driving off. Despite getting within 40 feet of the kidnapper's car, the neighbor was unable to prevent the abduction. He did manage to observe that the kidnapper had a Carolina license plate, and the first letter of the plate was the letter D. Right after this, the neighbor ran to the Helmick trailer to tell Debra's father what had happened. Authorities were called in, and a massive search began. But as hours ticked by, there was no trace of Debra or her abductor. Immediately, the Behavioral Science Unit and John Douglas began making connections between the abduction and murder of Shari Smith and the abduction of Debra Helmick. John Douglas devises a plan to bait the killer into calling the Smith family once again by holding a very public televised graveside memorial service for Shari.
But this was the nervy part. This was the high-risk part. Mr. Smith is looking at me, and he knows I'm thinking of something. And John, I said, well, I'm thinking of I have an idea. What is it? What do you want to do here? I sense when he was calling, he was fixating on Dawn, and so I'd like to work with Dawn so that when he calls, she knows how to keep him on the telephone long enough so that we can do a traps and trace. In the old days, traps and traces, it would be, you have to keep him on about 15 minutes on the phone, which is a long time. So I'll work with her there. But I also I'm like using her as a decoy. I'm using her to kind of, lasso in this guy. And Mr. Smith tells me, he says, is there any chance I'm going to lose my other daughter here? And I said, no. I said, we'll give her the protection. Don't worry about that.
The hope is that he won't be able to control himself from calling the Smith family once again, and maybe, during that call, he'll reveal details about Debra. And just like clockwork, after the memorial service, the mysterious caller rings the Smith family to talk to Dawn once again. And this time, in addition to no longer using a voice modulator, he has a much more threatening tone.
God wants you to join Cherry Face. It's just a matter of time. This month, next month, this year, next year. You can't be protected all the time.
And from this call, once again, he leads them to the body of 9.5-year-old Debra Helmick. Shortly after this, the investigators would uncover a major lead that gave them some headway on finding the killer, and it came from none other than the letter written by Shari. The last will and testament letter was written on 2 pages of a legal pad, ripped out. Meaning, in theory, other things written on the legal pad could have left indentations on the sheets that Shari wrote the letter on. In fact, there was a machine that did just this task, an electrostatic detection apparatus. And what this machine revealed was eye-opening. This electrostatic detection apparatus uses an electric charge in order to differentiate between the thicknesses of the 2 pieces of paper, which can reveal something written on the other side. There was a list of names and telephone numbers indented onto the pages of the letter, some kind of call in case of emergency list. One of the phone numbers was almost complete, just missing 1 number, and so investigators brute forced the final number by calling every option until someone picked up. A man. Investigators asked the man if he had any connection to South Carolina, to which he responded, yes, his parents live there. As it turns out, 15 miles away from Shari Smith's home. Investigators were quick to descend on the house and talk to the occupants. The husband, Ellis Shepard, said he was on vacation with his wife at the time that Shari went missing. This was eventually corroborated, meaning Ellis couldn't have been the abductor and killer. So as a last-ditch effort to make the most out of this lead, investigators played a snippet of the phone calls to Ellis to see if he could recognize the voice. And almost immediately, he did. The voice, Ellis said, belonged to a man who had been house-sitting while they were away on vacation. A man by the name of Larry Gene Bell. Larry Gene Bell was watching Ellis's home while they were on vacation, and they'd made arrangements with him for Larry to pick them up from the airport when they returned home. However, when Larry came to retrieve Ellis and his wife at the airport upon their arrival back home, Ellis remembered that something seemed off with Larry. He seemed nervous, on edge. He'd let his facial hair grow in, and it appeared he'd lost a significant amount of weight. When they tried to make small talk with him, all Larry wanted to talk about was the missing girl, Shari Smith. Larry fit the behavioral analysis unit's profile almost exactly. He was a white male, slightly overweight, although he had lost some weight due to stress. He worked as a corrections officer, which explained his somewhat organized and no-risk-taking personality. He was also trained as an electrician, which was specifically one of the professions John Douglas theorized the killer worked in. He was also divorced. His age was even within the upper range of the profile. The profile had estimated that the killer was in his late 20s or early 30s, and Larry Gene Bell was 35 at the time. When authorities searched the Shepherd home, they found even more forensic evidence that would point to Larry Gene Bell as the abductor and killer of Shari Smith. Multiple blonde hairs that were almost certainly Shari's. Larry Gene Bell was arrested and eventually went to trial in 1986 for the kidnapping and murder of Shari Smith. Despite attempts to make the jury believe he was insane, with just 47 minutes of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of kidnapping and murder in the first degree, and he was sentenced to death. 1 year later, Larry was on trial again, this time for the kidnapping and murder of Debra Helmick, and was also found guilty on both counts. On October 4th, 1996, Larry Gene Bell was executed via electric chair in a very publicized execution.
Ted, describe the scene there now.
Well, Ternell, right now there's a crowd behind me, I would say about 100 to 150 people protesting in favor of the death penalty. And right about now they're starting to do some yelling and some screaming. It's getting very close to 1 o'clock. It's quite an emotional scene down there. Earlier, we were down there getting interviews with people, and there's quite a few people, very emotional, family members. And now on the other side over here, we have several, I would say around a dozen people protesting against the death penalty. They have a small candlelight visual here. They're being very quiet and very peaceful. But down behind me, I don't know if you can very well make it out, but there's a light down there, and people are starting to count down right now. Earlier, we spoke with some of the members of the Helmick family, and as you can probably imagine, they're very emotional at this time.
It's time, huh? I mean, you know, we've waited for so long now. So long to see this man, and he walks in there and says that they don't think they should electrocute him because the Lord told him, you know, the Lord told him he should execute these kids. No, that's no, that ain't no excuse. He should have never took that into his hands. He should have never killed my cousin. So whatever they do to him, that he deserves everything they do to him.
Now, part of John Douglas' initial profile indicated that he believed whoever it was that kidnapped and killed Shari had done something similar before. Of course, in the case of Larry Gene Bell, it was never confirmed if he had committed any other murders. But connections have been drawn to Larry in at least 2 other cases. The first is the case of Sandy Elaine Cornett, who was 26 years old when she went missing. She had some connections to Larry Gene Bell, as she'd been engaged to a coworker of his, and it was determined that Bell had at one point attended a party at her apartment. On November 18, 1984, Sandy was at her house having dinner with her fiancé around 6:30 p.m. After dinner, her fiancé left and drove back to his home in Greenville, South Carolina. When he got home, he tried to call Sandy, but there was no answer. He didn't think much of it, believing she had just gone to bed a little early. The next day, Sandy failed to show up for work, and shortly after this she was reported missing by her neighbor. Upon searching her home, authorities didn't find any evidence of a break-in or struggle. Eerily enough, they found the contents of her pocketbook dumped out on her bed, the television on, and her house keys, driver's license, and checkbook lying nearby. Despite an extensive search, she was never seen again. The second case, which could be attributed to Larry Gene Bell but never confirmed, was the case of Denise Newsom Porch, who was 21 years old when she went missing. Denise worked at the Yorktown Apartments in Charlotte, North Carolina. On the day she went missing, July 31st, 1975, she was seen showing a man around the apartment complex. This was corroborated by a note she had left her husband prior to her disappearing. A search was conducted, but she was never seen again. She was declared legally dead in 1982. Bell had been living just 300 yards from the Yorktown apartment complex at the time. The lack of evidence in these cases make Bell's involvement even more believable. In Shari's case, from what Bell himself said in one of the phone calls made to the Smith family, he approached her with a gun and forced her at gunpoint to go with him, leaving very little evidence behind. This could have also been the case with both Sandy and Denise. But truthfully, we may never know. Shari's sister Dawn, upon reflecting on the horrific events that her family went through, is quoted as saying, "It had the potential of ruining my family's life. It did. It could have. But by the grace of God, we chose not to allow it to. It's only by the grace of God that helps us, any of us, to be able to say, this will not define me. This will not destroy me. This is going to make me a stronger person and still be used for good." Bob Smith, Shari's father, said regarding the final letter he received from his daughter, "That letter has been more closure to me than any kind of closure that the courts could do for me. Just the fact that she knew where she was going, and she had that kind of faith."
Tragic series of events has come to an end tonight at 1:12. Larry Gene Bell executed, and closure now begins for the victim's family and indeed for all of us, Turnell.
Yes, we just heard from a member of the Smith family. Actually, it was Shari Smith's uncle. They haven't talked very much about this case, but the Helmick family has shared a lot of things with News 19. They have shared something with us that brings this case close to home, and I'm holding it in my hand. It's called A Silent Cry for Justice, and it was written by Debra Helmick's sister, Becky. It begins simply by saying, "On June 14, 1985, a terrible thing happened to my family." She describes how her family learned of Debra's kidnapping. Then she goes on. She says that 8 days later, on June 22nd, 1985, the body of a 9-year-old girl was found badly decomposed in a field in Gilbert, South Carolina. This body was my sister's. A sweet, innocent girl who had never been beyond her childhood years. She had so many hopes, plans, and dreams for the future. They just all shattered right in front of my 5-year-old eyes.